Right. Welcome, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon to some of you. We are so excited that you're here at Maple Leaf Mystery Conference for our debut event. And we have a wonderful lineup of sessions and panels, and we are kicking it off with a wonderful interview featuring Maureen Jennings, interviewed by Helen Nelson. So I will pop back here in a little bit to do some questions. If you have any questions for Maureen, please pop them in our Q&A session down in your chat function, and I will let these wonderful authors take it away.
Well, I echo the welcome, and I'm just thrilled to be able to work with Maureen and do this this interview. I spent the last month or so avidly reading and rereading books by Maureen and watching for the first time some of the Murdoch mysteries, and watched all of Bomb Girls because I just couldn't stop.
Thanks, Helen.
And I found out a bunch of things about Maureen, who had her. This is the 25th anniversary of the first Murdoch book.
Yes.
And since then, she's written 7, I think, Murdoch books.
Yes.
And 4 Tom Tylers, and 2 Christine Morris, and 2, and soon to be 3, of Charlotte Frayne. And also there was Murdoch 20 years later, which it's Murdoch related,
Right.
and Murdoch's in it, but it isn't. It's
Right.
set just after World War I. And I think of all of your books, that one's my favorite. So that's an amazing accomplishment. One of the things I noticed when I was reading and rereading some of the some of the books is that Maureen you pay such a tremendous attention to detail. And I'm just curious about the kind of research that must go into providing the readers with that level of detail about the period. You read it, and you just read the books, and you just get a feel of being right there. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk about your process for the research.
Thanks so much, Helen. As a matter of fact, I didn't anticipate this, but right beside me, I don't know if you can see it. It's just a copy of the Toronto Street Directory, believe it or not. And this is 1936. I'm working on this for the latest book. And I'm sure everyone will understand. It's absolutely fascinating. So what I do, I also have another big map, which you can't see. And I was a bit exasperated with myself today, to tell you the truth, because one of the characters needs to be quite well-to-do, but she needs to be also rather close to the House of Industry, and they don't go together. So I had to have this terrible choice. Did I move her where the houses were well-to-do, or did I fudge it and put her in the middle of the Chinese community? And I thought, well, I've got to be true to this. She has to move out to Gerrard Street, and so she can look onto the park. And I hope you understand that's fun. I actually like doing that. And that whole part of working, as most people I sure will say, that is really fun. I love reading the street directory. I love doing the maps. I love reading the old newspapers, all of that. And then at some point you have to say, aren't I supposed to be writing a book? Oh, okay. And then get it in there. I do like to be accurate as much as possible, yes. But I'd be happy to share if you need a street. And then tell me, look it up.
So you will spend, obviously, I think, just reading the books, considerable time researching a lot of these details. I was struck in particular. I think it was the Tom Tyler that I read about how it really portrayed the lives of people in Britain during World War II, and also in the books that are set in between the two wars in Toronto, the Charlotte Frame ones in particular. Again, just how it just seems to just ooze with the life of the people who are living in that period of time, and it's that aspect of research that really fascinates me.
Well, honestly, I'd be very happy to share this tip, which is that if anyone is interested in starting a book historically, even way back, you go to the instruction books, and you should see them. I have these funny instruction books because they will tell you what the people didn't know at the time, what they wanted to know, and it's always like, I call it, you step through a little door into history. I have one about advice for coroners, which was written in 1892, things like that. And in the World War books that I have, they handed out a lot of little booklets to the officers. I don't know quite how they would read them in the middle of a bombardment, but anyway, but they were how to issue rum to the soldiers. I don't know. I hope that doesn't sound strange, but I find that really interesting. So yes, I go to the instruction books. I try to read diaries. I try to read newspapers. I actually avoid secondary sources as much as possible unless I really need an overview. But I just want to get to those people. What were they thinking? How did they talk? For example, I'm reading a book right now. It was published in 1935. Nellie McClung's autobiography, and I want everybody in Canada to read it. I want every child in school to read that book. It's absolutely incredible. I've hardly read a book like it, and it's not very well known. But anyway, stuff like that. I think I answered the question.
Yes, yes. Um, why did you focus on these periods? There's really three different, well, four, because you have the series that isn't historical as well. Even there's only 2 books in it. First of all, quickly, are you planning to write more of the Christine Morris books?
Not at the moment. It's one of the conscious reasons when I started out with Murdoch was that I knew that things changed so fast. And even since then, which is 25 years ago, they change even faster. So I knew that if I wanted to be authentic about forensics, for instance, I couldn't keep up. I knew I wouldn't possibly be able to keep up. And I love history anyway. So I thought, okay, I'll go back to a different time period where there was less technology, Zooms, no Zooms then, um, and using much more almost the Sherlock Holmes style of observation, deduction, memory. Police officers back then, I learned, prided themselves on never forgetting a face. They probably did, but they said they didn't. And that was hugely important in catching criminals. So when I realized I really wanted to write a mystery because that was 90% of what I read, I knew that it would be easier, I thought, to go back in time, and it in a certain way it is. It's then fixed. You don't have to worry about things changing like they do now. And then I went from there because I got very interested in forensic scientists, and I wanted to create a character who was that. And that was 2002. And now it's old. It's history. They don't even have cell phones. And it wasn't that there weren't any around except those, I think they were an enormous sort of walkie-talkies. So that's what I mean by changing. So I went back then to the Tyler series because I wanted to write about England, which is where I grew up. I wanted to write, which meant a war story, really. And again, it was easier than trying to keep up with forensics. Well, it had its own challenges, but that was really important journey for me. And then where did I go from there? Oh, thank you for liking that particular book, Helen. I think it's my favorite too, actually. The Let Darkness Bury the Dead. And that put me into the whole Canadian story again of World War One. And then as I started to move on, I found the period of 1935-36 absolutely fascinating. It was, unfortunately, I think it's too similar. It's almost like a mirror image again, the distant mirror idea of what's happening now, where there was a fear that there would be another war. A lot of people wanted to say, no, 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 no. We have to appease, we have to appease, we have to appease. And others were saying, look, forget it, it's going to happen. So that time period, I try to follow what I'm enthusiastic about. Obviously, I couldn't imagine not doing that. So I went from there to there. So that was the last series set in 1936, 37. That's when I wanted to have a female for a change. So that's my private investigator, Charlotte Frayne. And in Toronto, it's much easier to write where you live. And so that I have one more book now that I'm working on. That was the one where I was trying to find the affluent street. That's the fourth book in the Charlotte Frayne series. And I mean this, I really mean this. I know every writer will understand. I'm really grateful that to have that chance to have fun and to do something you love. And then, people say, oh, I like that. And you say, oh, did you? Thank you. So, yeah.
Yes, I'm enjoying that series too and looking for. When is the next one out? The next one.
The one that is finished, the third book in the series, is to be released in September.
Okay.
It was delayed. I think everything got delayed because of the pandemic. Right. So I was hoping it would be out a bit earlier, but it should be launched in September. And I'm cooking up the fourth book.
And after that, more? I'm hoping.
I don't know. You never stop. As long as my brain, well, anyway, yeah, hope so. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about I know you don't write all of the Murdoch mysteries or all of Bomb Girls, but you have written some scripts for both of those series. And I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about the difference between writing for television and writing a novel?
Yes. In a certain way, it's a big difference. And it was a steep learning curve for me when I got to write the first script for Murdoch, because I was much more used to words. And the lovely director, his name's Harvey, very gently and tactfully sort of said to me that it was a bit hard to film about 5 people talking all the time. So it's much more action. And I was, oh, okay. But so I think I've learned that now. And I think that has worked well moving into the novel. I don't think it crosses over that way very well, because I'm into words. And TV is not really. I mean, yes and no. You've got to say things, but mostly you want to show it in action. And I think I actually certainly learned some of that lesson, because I actually started out writing 2 plays. I hadn't written a novel at that point. And if I may share this story, because it was 2 things, such a learning experience. So in the story, this poor gal is really disfigured and she feels terrible about herself. And and so on. So when I was writing that play, she's talking about it and how she hates her beautiful sister and blah, 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 blah. And I suddenly thought, wait a minute, all she has to do is look in a mirror and kind of go silent. She doesn't have to say a word. And that she will convey that, a good actress would convey that to a viewer, that she's really unhappy about the way she looks. And so from a like 2 paragraphs of talking got down to, she looks in the mirror and it's like a sentence. So that was very important lesson. And TV's like that. TV kind of works like that as well. And then the other lesson, which I love to share, because this is one of my favorite things. In the play, everybody sits around and it's called a table read, and they're reading the script. This is the first play. I'm sorry, no, the second play. Oh, go away. Shh. And it was a small stage, and I knew there were too many bodies on the stage. So I just wrote in the script, exit Kip. That's all I said, because he had to get off the stage. So we're sitting around, and actors really like to be authentic. They they create these backstories. So we're sitting around, this lovely guy says, well, where do I go? I said, well, what do you mean, where do you go? You get off the stage. But that, of course, he was right. In real life, nobody just goes. They go to the toilet, they go to an appointment, they got to go somewhere. We move through time and space. Of course we do. But I wasn't thinking like that. And all of the actors were. So he said, well, do I go and look for footprints? I mean, what am I doing? It was, talk about a lesson. It was really good. So it stood me in good stead, I think, now, and I hope it still works, that I try to move my characters through time and space. Like if I say, for instance, it takes Charlotte 20 minutes to go from her office to the cafe, it's got to be 20 minutes. So I do all that timing and walking and sussing it out. And I hope that gives a depth to the stories, which, because that's how we live. We move through time and space. But I was so grateful to that actor for saying, well, where do I go? Well, get off the stage. I don't know, please.
I don't care where you go.
But another thing, which again, for writers, I'm sure we all know this, it's like, it might not be relevant, but I've got to know. I should know where he goes. And anything so I still think like that even now, where it's sort of off stage or on stage. So if it's off stage, a reader might not know that or need to know that, but I need to know. I need to know how long it takes to go from there to there or stuff like that. So that makes it real to me. And then I hope conveys to readers that the same thing. So I'm very grateful. His name was Mark. Thank you, Mark. If ever, I haven't seen him since ever, but where do I go? Yeah.
One of the things that's very evident in your is books, and really the TV series too, but the books in particular, is dealing with social issues.
Yes. Yeah,
and so it's there, and it's really well done, because it's not like it ever hits you on the head with a club, but you deal with issues like, well, for instance, at the time of really all the books set in Toronto, it was not everybody who lived here was a Protestant, but it was a very Protestant city. Right. And you couldn't be elected mayor, for instance. I know this, if you didn't have the endorsement of the Orange Lodge. So for Murdoch to be a Catholic was a really important decision, and really brought out some of those social issues. And similarly, the plight really of the soldiers returning from World War One, and which is still really evident in the 30s, sort of that combined with the unemployment of the Depression. So I'm just wondering, boy, any tips for the writers amongst us of how to bring in those social issues without clubbing people, and maybe a bit about why it's so important to you to do that, because it clearly is.
Thank you. No, it really is. And as you say, you don't want to just stuff it in somebody's face, but that I just try to follow all the time what sounds real. And certainly, if one of the things that, if I may share, I love sharing my discoveries, because one of the things that I discovered in the Charlotte Frayne series, which was after the war, that the city brought in what they were blue benches. And someone actually told me that she remembered them. They were around for a long time. And these were intended for disfigured soldiers. Now, the idea was ostensibly they could have privacy, but it was also a little warning to anyone who might happen to sit beside them that you were likely to see someone who was hideous. So that just was a little gem that I found, and there are always discoveries when you're reading stuff. But I thought that was really something, that funny mix of care and not. It wasn't that it wasn't caring, but who was it for? I guess that was of interest. And the soldiers, I have such a feeling for them. And now we know would be post-traumatic stress syndrome, but the fact that they were having to re-enter their old life, and they might have no legs or an arm missing or the face was gone. And I just feel for that. And I wanted to write about that as well, actually. And now it's the same time period, 1936, I'm really exploring what was then called the House of Industry, which is really the poorhouse, and how people who were destitute were treated. What was the attitude? And also what you say, I was very interested in the religious divide. And it's easy to forget that now. I think in Toronto, mostly it's easy to forget how deeply important religion, or ostensible overt religion, was to people. And those clashes, like Ireland were not that long ago, mirrored all of that. There's a joke, I have to tell this joke. Okay, a friend of mine went to Ireland, and somebody said to him, this wasn't, I don't know, say 80s, said to him, so what religion are you? And he said, oh, well, I'm actually an atheist. Well, what kind of atheist? A Catholic atheist or a Protestant atheist? I thought that was very funny. But it's that, and I find that very painful about our society, but worth exploring all the time, that intolerance, and certainly that was absolutely accurate when I made Murdoch a Catholic, although he gets a little further up the ladder than he probably would have in real life, because as a professed Catholic, there wasn't a lot of chance to get promoted. And I just find that really interesting to write about.
I could talk with you all day, but I'm supposed to turn this back to Alex, and she's going to give you questions from the 130 people who are here to hear this interview.
I want to know if they're Catholic atheists or Protestant. Those on the right. No, I thought that's funny. Yeah, okay, sure.
Could I be a Buddhist atheist?
I don't think they could spell that in Toronto of the time.
Probably not.
What is that?
Anyway, I do believe I'm sure that in all this chat, there are questions, and Alex is going to, I think, present them. I'm waiting for Alex to return. And if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat, preferably the Q&A, which has a few less things in it. Alex.
Oh, yes, we do have some wonderful questions. So we're just going to get right started here. Okay, so Michelle in Vancouver asks, how hard is it to get a book published that's set in Canada, especially historical mysteries?
That's actually, it's better. It's better now, honestly. I guess I'm going to slightly dodge the question and try to say, don't think about that. Literally write a book that you feel passionate about. And yeah, you might, if you say, would a TV series about a Victorian Toronto detective have succeeded? No way, no, it's in its 16th year. So you never know. Yeah, and I know that sounds a bit facile, but you just got to stick with what you really love and do the best book you can. And I think there's still room for it. But I think there's room. Yes, there's got to be room. We'll do it.
Wonderful, wonderful. So how important is the city of Toronto to Murdoch Mysteries? And what do you think of how the city is changing? And this is from Robert from North Bay.
Sorry, the last part was how the city has changed.
Yes, and what do you think of how the city is changing, particularly the downtown area?
Oh, I'm sorry, but I'm such a conservative. I don't like what's changing. It's becoming something else. And I may be unrealistic, but I think there could be a balance, which how I knew Toronto before was, in a funny way, it was a small town. It was big, but it was a small town. And it was a city of neighborhoods. I don't know. There's a little bit of that left, I think. But I'm the wrong person to ask, I guess. I don't like it. No, take them down. I don't know. No, it's hard. It's hard to change into a new city that could be exciting and dynamic and everything when you've loved the slightly fuddy-duddy old city, I think. Yeah.
There's definitely been a lot of change. Yes, we've all noticed that. Okay, can I sneak in one of my questions? I'm going to, because no one's telling me not to. Well, what book do you have on your nightstand, Maureen?
Oh, no. Oh, what books are on my nightstand? Oh my gosh. Okay. I laugh because they topple over. Nellie McClung for sure. It's brilliant. I've got the most fantastic biography of Elizabeth I that I've ever read by a man called Neil. Probably nobody's ever heard of it. I tend to try to read books from that time period so I know what other people were reading at that time. I've got the poems of Billy Collins, which if people listening like poetry, Billy Collins is one of the greatest poets ever, I think. Sort of Robert Frost. So he's there. I just got a book about Toronto, the story of Toronto theaters, like movie houses and everything. That's interesting. And I'm sure there are some more there. Oh, I know, right. I'm reading, I keep blocking the title. Louise Penny and Hillary Clinton's book together, but I forget what it's called. That one. So there's more, but those are definitely there.
Big nightstand you've got.
Oh, they literally fall over.
Okay, some more questions from the audience here. So we have from Rose. Where
State of Terror. Somebody just said it, told me.
Oh, there we go. So this is a question from Rose. Where did the inspiration to write Murdoch Mysteries come from?
Well, very much coming out of, as I said, feeling like I couldn't keep up with forensics. So I wanted to go to history. I loved the Victorian period. I wanted it to be in Toronto because I knew that I wanted to walk around. And that that's sort of how it started, actually. And because it was going to be a police procedural, I wanted it to be his job. That meant police procedural, and that meant a male, because there were no female detectives at this time. So as soon as I went to that time period, I started to be dictated to by what was real and what wasn't. And then I do what I usually do, which I was walking around looking in an old antique shop. And there was this, I should have brought it, but anyway, there was a photograph of this man, just a headshot, Liz. I said, oh, that's Murdoch. And interestingly, later, once I decided that was him for sure, I realized that this particular person, whoever he was actually a lawyer. I didn't notice that first, but around, he had a braiding around his jacket, and that meant he was a lawyer. But he looked like I wanted Murdoch to be. He looked intelligent and sensitive. They had a mustache then. They all had mustaches. And I think it all started to come together for a little bit from the photograph, but the photograph reinforcing what I knew I wanted this guy to be. And then, as I said, I wanted him to be Catholic because I knew this would give him challenges that he had to deal with.
That's fascinating. That's sort of a picture worth tens or hundreds of thousands of words, right?
Yeah, I use pictures a lot.
So we have a question from Joyce. Do you find it difficult to write several series at once?
Hi, Joyce. No, I don't, because I don't write them at once. I couldn't possibly do it, honestly. They definitely are in sequence. So by the time I get to 1936, that's where I am. And I don't get mixed up with 1894 or 1917. They're very discreet. I couldn't jump around. I don't think I could.
That's really interesting. All right. And then Loretta had a question. She just wanted to know about your experience researching different time periods. You talked a little bit about that. Anything more you want to add about that for Loretta?
Just as I say, there are several things that are so useful. Certainly newspapers. I absolutely read the local newspaper, which are easy to get online. And I actually have a couple of catalogs. Believe it or not, you can get a fantastic sense of history from looking at an old Eaton's catalog. What were they wearing? What was fashionable? What was the language that they used to describe a fashionable dress? What was the hairdo like? They're very, very helpful. So I look at those a lot, and then just pick up whatever else I can. As I said, very, very rarely do I use secondary sources. They're all primary sources like the diaries and the letters and stuff. But yeah, the catalogs are amazing, truly.
All right, we have a question from Michelle. Ooh, do you know how many rejections you went through before Accept the Dying was published?
A lot. I don't remember how many, but I do remember the moment when I got probably another one. In those days, they still answered. I'm not even sure if people answer anymore, but thank you very much, but this is not for us, And I remember I was actually upstairs, and I remember standing there with my little file and thinking, do I want to stop? And I thought, no, I don't. And I think it was almost like a race where you just are tired and you think, okay. I thought, no, I don't want to stop. And very soon after that, I guess I got Mike's first acceptance. But I certainly remember that moment of going, the file was, not that big, but definitely big.
Do you have pieces that you've worked on, little bits of that you've decided this is not something that the audience of today is going to latch on to, but I'd really like to write about? you have any pieces like that that are maybe in the works in the back of your mind that you'd love to put on paper, but it's not what's going to be mainstream right now?
Not exactly, but if I may do a little spin on that, what is a very important issue and I've had to grapple with from the beginning is changing of sensibility. Like, for example, in, well, even religion, in the very early Murdochs, um, homosexuality was a crime. It was literally, you could, if you were caught, you could, and not a light sentence. So how was I going to depict that in a way that was accurate, but not offensive to our sensibility now? And that's a very, very important issue, I think, if you're writing history. You don't want to have Murdoch, for example, so aware that he's unreal, but if he's part of that attitude, hey, so that I'm always aware of that. But I don't think I've ever thought what I'm writing about wouldn't be of interest, because I think it is. I really think that always, if we're looking into that distant mirror, we're going to find something that's fascinating. Always. I can't think of anything that wouldn't be at the moment. I don't know.
You have a lot of fans in the audience today.
Oh, thank you.
Let's see, do we have more? Oh, we have a question here from Susan. What is it like trying to keep Murdoch on your own track in your books when he is following a different path in the TV series?
That can be a challenge. Less so for me because I have 7 Murdoch books. So he was pretty established in my mind by the time the TV took over. So, but I know other writers when it's been really difficult if they're sort of going on at the same time. But mine aren't really. Murdoch at the moment in my books is on the shelf in a good sense, and he's complaining, but he's on the shelf. So I don't have to worry about it. But I think that could be a real challenge for other, but it hasn't been my challenge, but I know it has for other people, because the TV has its own life. And again, going back to actors, when I very first started and Murdoch was starting, and I remember going to the set, and I've often described it as if I were the mother-in-law, Murdoch's got a wife, and she thinks she knows him better than I do. And they'd be going, well, Murdoch wouldn't do. Wait a minute, why do you ask me? But it's not like that, and that's fine. That's how people, actors especially, start to take on their own ownership, and I'm okay with that. But I can see that might be. I have heard other writers say it's a challenge if you're trying to get them together, and they're not going to consult you. Forget that. So anyway, yeah.
And to that a little bit, we had a question. What is it like working with Yannick and Johnny on the set?
I don't think I work with them as such. They're fabulous. I am in awe of the amount of work that they do. All of them. I mean, I can hardly remember 2 lines, and they have to have huge day after day after day after day, and I'm so impressed that when I do see the episode, that they make it sound so natural. I'm so impressed with the way actors do that. I really am. So they are both absolutely, all of those guys, Tom, Helen, the main cast, they're so professional about the way they work at their craft. But I don't work with them. I wouldn't go and say, hey, I think you should, turn your head or something. They'd throw me out. No.
Helen, did you have any other questions? Oh, we've got more here. But Helen, did you want to read the next one here from Ardell?
Oh, I haven't been following on the Q and
Oh,
A,
that's
so I can't read them from there. I have
okay.
more of my own, but
Oh, let's,
I,
yes.
I do want to give the audience full chance to
Okay.
participate here.
Let me get
So
this
if
one
you have
in
more,
then.
go for it. But if you don't, I've got more.
Absolutely. I do have one here. Okay. Okay. All right. How did you get the fellow off stage? I have a time-space problem that this may help.
No, oh, that's funny. Thank you. Well, this was actually a table read. So he just knew he had to get off the stage. He needed to know why, for his own reasons, his own acting. So he had to act that he was going off the stage to look for footprints. I think that's what he finally decided. Oh, but he had to leave. You know, it said exit. You got to go. That was actually funny. They were absolutely wonderful. And another tiny thing, which again has been so helpful. I just wrote a little note in the script. The housekeeper comes in with a tea tray, and she's going to be serving tea. Nothing to that, right? However, in that instance, I was there, and the actress playing the housekeeper, she had to work out. Of course she did. You know, it's real life on stage at that moment, where the sugar was, where the milk was, and I mean, oh, I'm just because bring in the tea tray. No, you can't do that. Of course you can't, because you have that strange dichotomy that it's all fiction, but it's real. And if I would say one thing about the Murdoch show, I am so impressed and grateful to the set designers. Um, they are astonishing. Like, for example, I wrote an episode about the House of Industry, and I used some of the actual notices that they had back then. So the set designer in that set had copied a couple of them, and I don't think the camera ever focused on them. You wouldn't see it as a viewer, but they were there. And I think subliminally or even liminally, the actors got the feeling they were in the House of Industry with these little sayings, like don't spit or whatever it was. But I like that. I think that I remember a long time ago watching the it was not upstairs, yeah, upstairs, downstairs, and they talked about the fact that they used a lot of real antiques, and certainly I've heard our actors talk about the costumes and how when you're a woman and you're wearing a corset, it affects the way you feel about your character. And I like that. So it's like real life made up, all existing at the same time. And the sets are fantastic. Because there was one set, I remember walking around this one set, and I wanted to move in, and there was a whole pile of letters there. And of course, I had to read them. And they were not the right period. No one would know that, but they weren't. But they were real letters, historical letters. And I haven't actually asked an actor. I'm going to ask them, does it make a difference to you? It must make a difference. It must. But it's there. It's there subliminally. I am really impressed with those folks, actually. But why did I say that? Why did I go there? Sorry. I went off track somewhere.
Now, are you frequenting museums and theater these days in Toronto area?
Uh, well, unfortunately, everything closed down. But yes, museums museums are one of my favorite places. Antique shops.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love it. I was very lucky a few years ago to meet up with somebody who who had discovered treasure. This was in England, and I actually wrote about it. I used that in one of the books. And he discovered it was very small. It was just a little pot, and he had a metal detector, and he went beep, 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 beep. And he discovered that this pot, and in the pot there were these coins. I think there were 137 from the English Civil War. They had never been found. Someone had buried them, 300 plus years ago. And for some miraculous reason, they had never been dug up, even though it was a working field. So he found them, and in this little pot, which had deteriorated, but it's a small town, and I was allowed to hold one of the coins. And I just thought that was fantastic because they're very thin. It was a thin, thin gold coin. And to me, that's a way you can get into history if you are able to touch, even if better than seeing it, if you're able to touch the artifact and you can feel that it talks to you, it talks to me anyway. That was an amazing experience.
Mhm. Wonderful. And that kind of leads into our next question here from Mickey. So you touched on this a bit. What are your various sources of research, online libraries, archives, museums? And do you ever walk about a particular neighborhood to get the research?
Absolutely. That goes back to the other question. Am I unhappy about Toronto changing? Yes, but there's still just enough left so you can feel it for me. And that is typically Cabbagetown. That's where I set the books. And there's still enough there that I can walk, which I do. And I went over to the House of Industry recently, and went inside actually, and to get the feeling. Yes, I find that very important because architecture tells us a lot. If you get a chance, if you're in Toronto, to go over to Elm Street, because they kept the facade of the House of Industry, and you can just, in a minute, you can go back and you're a destitute person and you're coming here to get food or a night's lodging, and you can feel it. Thank goodness it's still there. So I don't know how people can write about a place that they're not able to walk in. I know people do, but I don't think I could do that.
Maybe they're just not as good. No, that's a great point. And I think there's going to be some people walking around that neighborhood now to get the feel for your books.
Yeah.
We have some people trying. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just on that, the neighborhood I live in was dry.
Oh, right.
Until 20, 25 years ago, I forget exactly when, but it was dry. And when you read the history of how it went dry and all of that, which is way back at around 1900, I can't remember exactly when, but they mention all these different buildings, and you can walk around the neighborhood and still see them and really get a real sense, like you say, of what it was like, and the big party that was held the night before it went dry, and all of that kind of thing. So I really can relate to what you're saying about walking the street and feeling it.
Yeah, absolutely. The architecture says such a lot. The family, say it's a big house, and you can see there's the beautiful drawing room. Then you look up and there's the servant quarters, and it just says everything about society. Or if you get a chance to go into such a house, the servants' stairs are in the back. You have the grand staircase, then in the back where the servants went. And the other thing I like to say is that's where the children were as well, apparently.
Yeah.
But it says everything. Architecture is a story, and architecture tells us how people thought, what they valued, all of that. And one of the things that I do like about good old Toronto is that they liked ornamentation, which is interesting, that we think of it as a plain city, which I think it was, but there's nice little brickworks and things like that. And if anyone is in Toronto, gets a chance down on College Street, it was the police station, and there's gorgeous arches. Again, like what were they trying to say with the architecture? Why did the Toronto General Hospital look like a jail, or vice versa? You know, things like that. So I find that very interesting. Yeah,
Okay,
walking's really important. Sorry.
we have a not too long left in our hour here, but there's a few more questions, and I'll hand it back to Helen in just a moment here. So we had, how do you choose the names for characters in your books?
Oh, I like that
From
question.
Wendy. Mhm.
Oh my goodness, that is such a challenge. And I spend a lot of time trying out the names. I really do. And that's where I go back to my little street directory. So if I'm not stealing my friends' names, which I do, I will typically I'll take a surname and mix it up with somebody else's first name. And again, even now, there's an old book, I think it was Tristram Shandy. And there's the beginning of Tristram Shandy, which is what, 1700s, I guess. He's talking about the importance of the name. And I think it really is. I think that I take a lot of time, okay, I want a character to be such and such. What does that name convey? And certainly historically, it's really important to get that right echo. The downside of that is they didn't use a lot of different names. So you get, how can you have 20 Johns or 16 Williams, or, you know, but so that's trying to get that variety without spoiling it. But it's really important, and I'll try it on, and sometimes it won't work. It doesn't feel right. And so I'll change it afterwards, but getting the right name, I'd love to hear from other people actually, because I haven't ever talked about this to people, but I think that's really, really important. So just an obvious joke, I'm not going to call my Victorian heroine Tiffany or Love or whatever. Maybe not, maybe
Yeah.
not Tiffany. Tiffany's all right. But you know what I mean. So
One
yeah,
more
names.
question from our chat, and then I'm going to hand this
Yeah,
back to Helen here.
yeah.
So the question is from Susan. Have you had the same editor for all your books? If you have an editor or inspiration for the titles of your book.
I haven't had the same editor. I've had about 4 different editors for different reasons. And the title I got into, this is the Hemingway influence. I got into liking titles that were part of a quotation. And then, of course, they tended to be all Shakespearean, except for the first book, which is from Emily Dickinson. I mean, to have a mystery story to say, it was an ordinary night, except the dying. And you go, oh, that's perfect. Thank you very much. Except people kept thinking I was saying accept the dying as opposed to accept the dying. So maybe it wasn't such a good title. But I like that. I like it's like poetry, you know, if you're writing poetry, one's always told the title is part of the poem. And I think it's true of a book too. Like if you can get your title evocative and interesting, you're already a little step there. So yeah, I like that. I put my latest title. Oh, I know, I got into the weather. Heat wave, November rain, cold snap, and now I've moved into spring. And at the moment, the next book's called March Roars, which I kind of liked. So, but that's the only time I've switched from quotes. Yeah, the quote. And if I may say again, that one of my favorite books, Helen mentioned, the Shakespeare is like, whoa. Sometimes I'll start with what I'm trying to convey. Like the quote from there is, I think it's one of the less well-known plays. It might be a Henry play. And the son has died. And the woman is talking about the grief that is. It's just incredible. So I say, okay, I'm writing about grief, or I'm writing about this, like Beware This Boy. I'm writing about evil, really, and that's from Dickens. And so I kind of get started with what I'm writing about, and then I get the title from that, and I typically mine Shakespeare. One of those. Where is Shakespeare? Where are you? Oh, that's why William's named William, by the way. Of course, William Shakespeare, of course.
Okay, Helen, we have 4 minutes left. I'm going to
okay.
pop backstage.
Thank you, Alex.
4
Thank you
minutes.
so much.
So I did have one. This is a pretty short question.
Okay.
Are you a plotter or a pantster, or some combination of both?
What was the second one? A plotter or a what?
A plotter or a pantster. So you outline and plotter, you outline and write it all out and figure it all out in advance, and then you write it. Or a pantster, you sort of start with an idea and just let it flow.
First. Honestly, I would find that really hard. It's a bit of both, of course it is, but this is my book, which I call my magic book. It's the best notebook in the entire world for writers. It's got hardcover, it's fabulous. So I do a lot of plotting ahead of time, because if I don't, I think I waste time. To me, it's a bit like going on a journey. You know, you're going to Ottawa, you've got to plan it. You might do a couple of detours, but it saves you a lot of time if you know where you're going. And I definitely err on that side, but it changes along the way. But I couldn't, I'm too anxious. If I was going on a journey, I wouldn't say, I'm going on a journey now. Well, where are you going? Well, I don't know. I need to know, where am I going? I'm going there.
But I'm sure your characters surprise you sometimes.
Yes, they do.
Yes.
Yes. And again, I know a lot of writers know that mine always come on the left shoulder. Why, I don't know. They come over the left shoulder and say things like, well, I was pregnant, What do you mean? Stuff like that. It's great.
Well, I think to ask another question with 2 minutes left, or less than 2 minutes left, I think would probably be tough. So I think I will thank you on behalf of everybody for this, and I will personally thank you, because I had a really great time doing this, and it's really made me looking forward to your next books. And I hope that's true for other people who are participating today as well.
Thank you, Helen. It means an awful lot to know that people are reading the books and have that kind of support. And you've been a fantastic moderator. Thank you so much. It's really makes a huge difference.
I actually have one quick little story. The first time I visited a friend in Britain, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but a while back. And she, I got there and I was really tired, and she at a certain point in the evening said, "No, I have to watch Murdoch."
Oh, no, that's lovely. Thank you.
And that was the first time I saw it. So I know it's called something else in the States, but it's been there, and it's in Britain, and it's all over the world, and very popular and well loved. So well done.
Well, there was one time, it's actually, I think, in Czechoslovakia, and sometimes they do subtitles, sometimes they dub. And I caught a little clip, and they were speaking Czech, they're dubbing, and then all of a sudden, Brackenreed said, "Oh, bollocks." It was like, wait a minute, I guess that didn't translate into Czech, I don't know. But yeah, no, thank you, it's been amazing. And in the States, it was called The Artful Detective, and now they thought that was ridiculous, so they've gone back to Murdoch Mysteries. Yeah. So, yeah.
Good. I think they're going to kick us out here because
Okay.
it's now 8:01 and
Oh,
they have
oh,
to get ready for the next panel.
oh, wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much. It's been really fun. Really great. Thank you.